I was 46 when my world cracked in a way I never saw coming, even after nearly 2 decades of holding a giant company together with quiet hands. For 19 long years, I had been the unseen engine inside Apex Translogistics in Denver, Colorado. While other departments enjoyed coffee chats, team lunches, and promotions, I sat in a small corner office on the 15th floor, surrounded by blinking servers and humming monitors, making sure the entire payroll system stayed alive. It wasn't glamorous work. It wasn't noisy work. But it was necessary in a way that most people will never understand. I kept 37,000 workers paid on time across America and Europe, week after week, month after month, year after year. Drivers with mortgages, warehouse teams with families, and office staff counting on every paycheck to clear. And all of them trusted a system that only functioned because I kept patching holes no one else even knew existed. My little brick house on Willow Creek Drive was my sanctuary from all that. I bought it for $280,000 back when money stretched a little further. The kind of quiet home where you could hear wind through the backyard trees and forget, even for a moment, the pressure waiting the next morning on your office screen. Inside those walls, I felt like myself, not just the woman who made the impossible run smoothly. I drank coffee in the kitchen, watched the sun slip over the Rockies, and sometimes wondered if anyone at Apex Trans even knew how much they depended on me. But I never complained. I never asked for recognition. My work spoke louder than any award ever could. Payroll wasn't something you could hand off to just anyone. It wasn't simple math. It was rules, conditions, scripts, thousands of time cards, shifting overtime, tax laws, banking connections, midnight file transfers, and old European software from the early 90s that looked like it was held together with duct tape and hope. I had learned its moods. I knew which files crashed when too many people logged in at once. I knew which batch needed manual nudging every Thursday afternoon. I could read error logs like people read novels. And for 19 years, I didn't miss a single payment run. Not one. Imagine being perfect at something for almost 2 decades and still being invisible. Mark Ellison, my boss, liked to call payroll magic and acted like it simply happened when he thought about it. He walked around the office with his neat hair and soft hands, proud of running a department that actually ran itself because I never let anything break. He didn't understand the system.
He didn't want to.
As long as things worked, he didn't care how. Sometimes I'd overhear him telling executives that everything was automated now, as if the scripts weren't written by my own fingers, line by line, midnight after midnight. He never thanked me for the nights I spent fixing corrupted backups or for the weekends I stayed home because a server needed babysitting. But I stayed quiet. That was my job, to keep things moving, to keep everyone calm, to keep disasters away. Then Bradley Foster arrived, and everything changed. Bradley was 20-something, fresh from a business school somewhere in Europe, and walked into our office like he was stepping onto a stage. Slim suit, shiny shoes, confidence that didn't match the experience he lacked. He carried an Excel model like he was holding fire from the gods and talked nonstop about modernization, innovation, and efficiency. He looked at me like I was an outdated manual typewriter left in a digital age. The executives loved him from the moment he shook hands with them. They clapped when he presented his first modernization proposal, which was basically a colorful spreadsheet telling us to delete half the system and rebuild it on faster tools he'd read about in a book. He called me the legacy lady behind my back. Once, he even joked that I was the museum keeper of old software. I laughed politely, but inside, I felt something twist. I had seen people like him come and go over the years. People who believed the world ran on trends instead of details, on models instead of reality. People who forgot that behind every number was a family, a bill, a medical payment. People who thought everything could be replaced with something new before learning what the old thing actually did. 3 weeks after he arrived, they fired me. It happened on a Thursday morning. I came in with my usual coffee, walked to my desk, and found Mark waiting for me with a printed letter. His hands shook a little, but not enough to show regret. He told me the company was moving toward a more modern direction and that Bradley's system was going to take over payroll. He said it as if I hadn't given 19 years of my life to the place. He said it as if replacing complex systems was as easy as clicking save on a spreadsheet. Bradley stood behind him, trying to look serious but failing. He had the smile of a child who had just been told he was getting a bigger bedroom. I was given 10 minutes to clear my desk. 10 minutes for 19 years. I packed my sticky notes, the old mug my sister bought me, and a flash drive with harmless personal files. No goodbyes. No gratitude. Just silence broken by the sound of my own footsteps as I left the building. I remember walking out into the cold Denver air and feeling like the world had tilted. My hands shook, not from fear, but from disbelief. I drove back to my brick house on Willow Creek Drive and sat in the driveway for a long time, watching the sky fade into evening. I was hurt, yes. But beneath the hurt was something stronger, a burning certainty. They had no idea what they had just done. That night, I locked my front door, walked into my quiet living room, and whispered to myself that Apex Trans had just fired the only person who truly understood how its heart beat. And sooner or later, they were going to realize it. And when they did, they would come crawling back. I thought I would have at least a week to breathe after getting fired, maybe sit on the back porch of my brick house in Denver and let the shock settle. But life didn't give me even that. 3 days after I walked out of Apex Trans with my box of forgotten desk items, the entire company collapsed in a way that felt almost biblical. It started early on a Monday morning, long before the news cameras arrived, long before anyone outside the building knew what was happening. It began inside the system I had kept alive for 19 years, a system that was now in the unskilled hands of someone who had no idea what he was touching. Bradley's modernization plan looked shiny in his Excel sheets, but reality cracked it within hours. His formulas overwrote the timekeeping imports. The new workflow, he bragged about, erased overtime calculations. The banking interface rejected nearly everything he uploaded because he didn't understand the formatting rules. He tried to optimize the European pay cycle and ended up shifting it by 8 days. He thought a script error message meant nothing serious and ignored it until it shut down the batch processing queue entirely. And because payroll is unforgiving, because banking deadlines do not care about a young MBA trying to play innovator, the damage hit instantly. By Wednesday night, the entire cycle failed. On Thursday morning, more than 30,000 workers across America and Europe woke up without a paycheck in their accounts. Not delayed, not shorted, fully missing. Drivers in Ohio were short hundreds of dollars. Warehouse teams in New Jersey had their hours wiped out. Administrative staff in Chicago received zeros. Workers in France and England, who depended on different banking schedules, didn't get paid either. Chaos spread faster than wildfire. I learned all of this not from the company, not from Mark, but from the morning news on my television. I was sitting in my kitchen in my old gray robe, sipping coffee from the mug my sister sent me years ago, when I saw a crowd of Apex Trans workers standing outside the Denver headquarters. It felt strange watching them on TV instead of walking past that same glass entrance myself. A reporter stood among the crowd, trying to talk over the noise. Someone behind her shouted that they couldn't buy groceries. Someone else held a cardboard sign demanding their money. The anger in their faces was something I had never seen in all my years managing payroll. The reporter then read a leaked internal email from Mark. I nearly choked on my coffee when she quoted him blaming legacy systems for the disaster. Legacy systems, my systems, had carried that company longer than Mark had worn suits. They had never failed. Not once. And now, with me gone, the moment someone else touched them, the whole world was supposed to believe the problem was age, not ignorance. I laughed so loudly that the neighbor's dog barked. But laughter only lasted a few seconds because soon the strike threats rolled in. Unions issued statements demanding answers. Drivers parked their trucks across the entrance of a distribution center in Pennsylvania, blocking outgoing shipments worth millions. News channels replayed footage of angry workers all day. The stock price slid by $9 before lunch. Online forums roasted Apex Trans with comments like, "Pay your people before pretending to be modern." It all looked like a company falling off a cliff. Then came the call I expected but had been waiting for with a mix of dread and satisfaction. Mark phoned me around 2:30 in the afternoon. I saw his name on the screen and let it ring twice, just long enough for him to sweat. When I finally answered, the sound of panic in his voice was almost painful. He spoke fast, stumbling over phrases about unexpected difficulties and technical problems. He couldn't quite bring himself to say that Bradley had wrecked the system, but the truth hovered in every broken sentence. He tried to sound friendly, as if firing me last week had been nothing personal. I could hear the chaos behind him, the shouts, the doors opening and closing, the frantic typing from people who suddenly realized they didn't understand anything they were responsible for. He said they needed me to come in and help clean up the old system, and he framed it like I should feel sorry for them. He even tried adding, "just for a few hours if you can," as if I didn't know the disaster would take days to fix. I didn't agree. I didn't decline. I simply said I'd think about it, and hung up before he could rush into another excuse. The silence in my kitchen felt powerful. For the first time in 19 years, the weight was no longer on my shoulders. It was on his. It was on Bradley's. It was on every executive who thought replacing experience with a pretty spreadsheet was a smart idea. I put on my coat and went for a walk around my neighborhood. The air smelled like pine, and the sidewalks glowed under the late afternoon sun. My anger softened with every step, replaced by a deep, absolute clarity. They needed me more than I needed them. No one else knew the system the way I did. No one else could rebuild the catastrophe that had unfolded. No one else had the endurance to untangle the knots of scripting errors, corrupted backups, overwritten hours, and banking rejects. As I walked past the houses, each with its own stories and worries, I felt strangely peaceful. I imagined the executives stumbling around the office, terrified of losing everything. I pictured Bradley staring at a screen he didn't understand, realizing his shiny models weren't enough. By the time I returned home, the sky had darkened. I heated leftovers, watched the news recap the collapsing situation, and felt nothing but certainty. I knew exactly what was happening inside Apex Trans, down to the hour, down to the minute. I knew every error that would appear, every failed batch that would bounce back, every department that would scream next. And I knew only one person alive could resurrect that system. Me. For the first time in days, I slept with a calm mind and steady breath, knowing the storm was only beginning, and knowing exactly who would be called to end it. The next morning, I woke before sunrise with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. It was strange, standing in my own kitchen, knowing that behind the glass walls of Apex Trans, an entire company was choking on a disaster of their own making. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the warmth run through my hands, and reminded myself, they didn't fire me because I failed. They fired me because they never understood what failure looked like until it swallowed them whole. By 8 o'clock, I grabbed my leather jacket, locked my front door, and drove toward downtown Denver. The city was waking up in slow gold light, but I felt like I was heading into a battlefield. As I pulled into the parking garage, my phone buzzed with 3 more missed calls from Mark. I didn't answer. I wanted them to feel every ounce of uncertainty they had given me last week. Inside the building, the atmosphere felt entirely different from the calm corporate bustle I had known for 19 years. People rushed between floors with frantic faces. Someone in accounting yelled into a phone. A manager from HR was crying near the elevator. The tension rolled through the hallways like a physical force. And for the first time in a long time, no one looked through me. They looked at me. They stared like I was oxygen. I walked into the 15th floor conference room with steady steps. Mark was there already, leaning against the table with his shoulders slumped. Bradley sat beside him, tapping a pen like a nervous child. When he saw me, he straightened up as if pretending confidence could erase what he had broken. "Thank you for coming," Mark began, but his voice cracked. It didn't matter. I hadn't come for gratitude. I had come for control. I didn't sit right away. I walked around the table slowly, letting the silence stretch until even Bradley stopped tapping. Then I lowered myself in a chair at the head of the table, placed my notebook down, and folded my hands. "I'm not here as your employee," I said calmly. "I'm here because you have a disaster, and I am the only person capable of stopping it." Mark nodded quickly. Bradley stared down at the table. Neither of them dared to disagree. Then I opened my notebook and spoke clearly. These are my conditions. The first one hit them like a hammer. $250,000 paid up front before I touched a keyboard. Mark blinked twice, stunned, but he didn't argue. Not after the riots on the news. Not after the stock drop. Not after unions threatened to shut down 3 major hubs. The second condition was full authority over payroll operations across America and Europe. No approvals. No interference. I knew more about that system than every director in the building combined, and I wasn't going to let another amateur shove his fingers into the machinery. The third condition landed directly on Bradley's ego. He would be completely removed from anything related to payroll. His face reddened instantly, but he kept quiet. The crisis had stripped him of every drop of swagger. For the first time since he arrived, he looked like a boy who finally realized his toy was not a toy at all. The fourth condition was a written, official apology from the executive team acknowledging that firing me caused the payroll collapse. Not just privately.
Publicly.
Printed.
Signed. Archived.
The final condition was the simplest, but most important to me. Respect. If they spoke to me, it would be with the recognition I had earned over 19 years. No more being treated like an old system lady. No more jokes about legacy. I was done being their invisible backbone. The silence, after I finished, felt heavy. Mark swallowed loudly. Bradley shifted in his seat, looking like he wished the floor would open and drag him down. Then Mark finally nodded and whispered, "Agreed." A few minutes later, finance wired the money. I watched the numbers shift on my phone screen, and when the deposit was confirmed, something inside me settled. For 19 years, I had given everything to Apex Trans. Now, for the first time, they were giving something back. I walked into the server room with the same feeling I imagined surgeons felt before opening a chest. The air was cool. The machines hummed like they were whispering their fears. The main payroll server blinked an error code I recognized instantly. I pulled my chair to the terminal, cracked my knuckles, and touched the keyboard. My fingers knew their path by instinct. I opened corrupted directories, searched for overwritten backups, traced Bradley's broken formulas, and reversed damage that would have taken him months to even identify. Every line of code I repaired reminded me how deeply I understood this system, how it had grown with me, how I had shaped it piece by piece. Hours passed. People brought food I had never eaten. Someone offered coffee I never touched. I ignored everything except the screens in front of me. I restored one batch at a time, recalculated every missing hour, rebuilt the banking file manually, and double-checked every region: America, England, France, Germany. Around 2 a.m., I felt the exhaustion creeping in, but I kept going. I wasn't just fixing payroll. I was reclaiming something they tried to take away from me. At 3:40 a.m., I rebuilt the last routing table. At 4:07 a.m., I verified each worker's file. And at 4:12 a.m., I pushed the final batch through the banking system. The entire payroll engine roared back to life. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and let the hum of the servers settle around me like an old, familiar lullaby. Somewhere above me on the upper floors, executives were waiting in tight circles, praying that I could undo the damage they caused. And now every worker across America and Europe was about to receive their pay. I stood up slowly. My back ached, my throat was dry, but my heart felt stronger than ever. I didn't save Apex Trans because they deserved it. I saved it because no one, no spreadsheet, no MBA, no executive would ever replace the woman who built its backbone. When dawn finally crept into Denver, I watched the city from the 24th floor like someone seeing the world through new eyes. The sky shifted from deep blue to soft gold, and the light touched the tops of the buildings one by one, as if waking them gently. I stood there with tired hands and an aching back, but a calm strength ran through me that I hadn't felt in years. Beneath me, the city hummed with life, unaware that inside this building, an entire company had been resurrected in the quietest, most brutal overnight session imaginable. When I stepped out of the server room, the executives were gathered like anxious schoolchildren waiting for test results. Mark looked worn down, his suit wrinkled, and his eyes heavy. Bradley stood behind him, small and silent, his confidence drained like someone had unplugged his power supply. The head of HR approached me with a stack of papers pressed to her chest, her shoulders tense. She handed me the printed apology statement, already signed by every executive in the building. It took me a moment to realize I was holding something I had never received in 19 years of loyal service, acknowledgement. It wasn't just a memo. It was an admission that firing me had broken everything, and bringing me back had saved them. I read the lines slowly, letting the meaning settle in. Not because I needed their validation, but because I wanted them to put in writing what they had never said out loud. That they depended on me. That the system depended on me. That the modern world depended on invisible hands like mine. Mark extended his hand and tried to smile, but there was guilt behind his eyes. "Thank you," he said softly, and for once, those words sounded real. Bradley didn't speak. He couldn't. He stared at the carpet as if it might swallow him whole. Part of me expected to feel pity for him, but I didn't. I had carried too many long nights to offer sympathy to someone who thought a spreadsheet made him a genius. He had wanted my seat. He had wanted my authority. And now he understood the weight of both. As I walked through the hallway, employees whispered my name like I was some kind of miracle worker. But I didn't gloat. I didn't brag. I simply felt taller. Stronger. The same walls that once made me feel small now looked too narrow for who I had become. My leather jacket hung over my shoulders, and I held my head high, knowing I was no longer the quiet woman they pushed aside. I was the backbone they had tried to remove, only to realize everything collapsed without it. After filing the last of my reports, I left the building and stepped into the cool morning air. The sky had brightened into soft blue, the world moving on as if the previous day's crisis hadn't nearly destroyed thousands of lives. I drove home to my brick house on Willow Creek Drive, turned off the engine, and sat for a long moment in silence. My body was tired, but my spirit felt steady in a way I hadn't known since my early years at Apex Trans. Saving the company hadn't been about pride. It had been about the truth. And the truth was simple. They never understood the weight I carried until the weight crushed them. Over the next weeks, I returned to Apex Trans not as the old version of myself, but as the woman they now feared losing. The apology statement was posted internally, and for the first time, people started treating me like the expert I had always been. Directors consulted me before making decisions. Managers stopped pretending they understood the system better than I did. Even IT asked for documentation on the processes I had kept in my head for years. I realized then that power doesn't come from titles. It comes from being the person they can't function without. A month later, the executive team invited me to a meeting. They offered me a new role, Senior Executive Director of Payroll Architecture, with a salary of $380,000 a year. They said the title was meant to reflect the critical nature of my work. I smiled politely and accepted, but inside, I felt something deeper. Not victory. Not revenge. Just justice. With a new income, I bought a small cottage in Maine for $190,000. A place with white shutters, worn wooden floors, and a porch that overlooked the Atlantic. A place where I could listen to waves instead of error codes. I furnished it with soft chairs, warm blankets, and a shelf full of books I had never found time to read. It became my escape, a reminder that my life was more than the system I protected. But I never forgot what happened. And I never let anyone at Apex Trans forget, either. When they tried to push new changes without consulting me, I simply raised an eyebrow and reminded them of what happened the last time they ignored the expert. When someone used the word legacy in a condescending tone, I corrected them. It's not legacy. It's the backbone. And when Bradley eventually transferred to another department, I didn't miss him. He had always chased titles. I had always chased results. People sometimes ask what I do now, and I tell them the simplest truth. I run the invisible engines of Apex Trans. I keep the heart beating. I keep the wheels turning. Not through flashy presentations or shiny buzzwords, but through understanding, discipline, and the kind of knowledge you only gain from living inside a system for years. They fired me. They begged for me. And now, because they finally saw the truth, I run the place. Not through power games, not through politics, but through the undeniable force of someone who actually knows what she's doing. The modern world doesn't run on speeches. It runs on people like me.